Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a devoted dad builds a dream treehouse for his kids, he doesn't expect it to spark a war with the neighborhood HOA. But when one power-hungry woman crosses the line, chainsaws in hand and kids inside, the battle for backyard freedom turns into a national firestorm. When I first built the treehouse, it wasn't just for the kids, it was for us. My wife, Jenna, called it therapy with a hammer. After years working on skyscrapers, bridges, and projects no one remembers the names of, I finally got to build something that actually made people happy. Something that squeaked when you climbed the rope ladder. Something that echoed with laughter, not the stress of code compliance meetings and procurement delays. It was a damn good treehouse, too. 4-point harness brackets on all load-bearing beams, structurally rated lumber, composite shingles. If the zombie apocalypse hit, that treehouse might have lasted longer than our actual home. My 3 kids, Lucy, Ben, and Theo, loved it. Every day after school, they'd run straight into the backyard, shoes flying, backpacks discarded, climbing up into their fortress like little commandos. Sometimes I'd join them, beer in hand, pretending I was king of the hill. Mostly, I just liked watching them be kids. Our property sat on the edge of Pine Creek Hollow, a manicured HOA neighborhood where the mailboxes matched and the grass dared not grow past regulation height. We weren't part of it. Not legally, not geographically, not emotionally. Our deed went back 60 years, long before the HOA ever paved its first cul-de-sac. My dad used to say we were outside the reach of polite tyranny. That's exactly how I liked it. Then Karen Sloan showed up. I first saw her while tightening the swing beam bolts. She was standing at the far side of the back fence, arms crossed, lips pinched, like she'd just swallowed something sour and expensive. I thought she might be lost. Jenna was trimming the rose bushes near the side gate and waved politely. Karen didn't wave back. 2 days later, a glossy HOA pamphlet arrived in our mailbox, which was odd considering we weren't supposed to receive HOA anything. It featured a 2-page spread titled Visual Harmony in Our Community with a full-color photo of a generic backyard, all lawn, no fun, and a paragraph warning against unauthorized structures compromising aesthetics and safety. Jenna read it, raised one eyebrow, and dropped it straight into the recycling bin. I wish that had been the end of it. A week later, while I was adjusting the solar floodlight on the treehouse roof, Karen returned. This time, she had a clipboard. She stood right on the public walking path behind our property line, squinting up like she was inspecting a condemned building. "Excuse me," she said, in that tone that means exactly the opposite. "Are you the homeowner?" I nodded. "Yep, anything I can help you with." "That structure is concerning," she said, tilting her head at the treehouse like it had personally insulted her lawn. "It appears to violate visual standards and might pose a risk to nearby children." I had to stop myself from laughing. "My kids are the nearby children," she frowned. "You know, HOA guidelines prohibit elevated structures visible from neighboring properties." "Good thing I'm not in the HOA," I said with a smile. That didn't go over well. She made a noise halfway between a huff and a snort and scribbled something on her clipboard. "We'll be reviewing this situation." I watched her march off, clipboard clutched like a weapon, heels clicking against the pavement like a ticking clock. I knew it was coming. I just didn't think it would come so fast. The letter came folded in a glossy Pine Creek Hollow envelope, sealed with a faux gold emblem that looked like something from a low-budget country club. Inside was a printed notice on HOA letterhead titled Notice of Violation, Unauthorized Structure. It listed the offending item as an unapproved recreational elevation with potential visibility from adjacent parcels, which, in normal English, meant my kid's treehouse. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading it twice while sipping lukewarm coffee. Jenna leaned over my shoulder, muttering, "They really typed this with a straight face." The best part, it ended with a threat of escalating action if the structure wasn't removed within 14 days, which was rich considering we didn't belong to the HOA in the first place. Our plot sat well outside their jurisdiction, something I verified years ago before we even bought the property. I'd kept that paperwork filed away for just this kind of moment. Not that I'd expected to need it. I made 3 phone calls that afternoon. One to our lawyer, who also happened to be a friend of mine from college, one to the city's zoning office, and one to a contractor buddy who'd helped me reinforce the base of the treehouse, just to double-check we hadn't missed anything. I wanted every box checked before pushing back. The next day, my attorney sent a cease and desist letter directly to the HOA board, attached with copies of our deed, zoning documents, and permits for the treehouse. It was thorough, legally airtight, and crystal clear. Pine Creek Hollow had no authority over my land. The structure was legal, inspected, safe, and no, we wouldn't be taking it down to satisfy a bureaucratic power trip. I thought that might be the end of it. A bluff called, a boundary reasserted, but then Karen started escalating. I came home 2 evenings later to find 2 men with polos and measuring wheels standing behind my fence line, taking photos. One even had a drone buzzing overhead, clicking like an oversized mosquito. I walked out back and leaned over the railing of the treehouse. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" One of them looked up sheepishly. "Just surveying for a pending compliance action. HOA request." "You're on public land." "Fine, but I recommend you don't cross that fence. Unless your job comes with a tetanus shot and a lawyer." They left, but the message was clear. Karen wasn't done. That week, she hosted a community HOA meeting in the clubhouse. I wasn't invited. Again, not a member, but Jenna's friend Lauren was. She came back wide-eyed and breathless, saying that Karen stood up in front of everyone and declared the treehouse a hazardous structure that set a dangerous precedent. According to Lauren, Karen said, "If we let this go, who knows what monstrosities people will build next. Sheds, chickens, junkyards." Apparently, I was the gateway drug to rural anarchy. Lauren said most of the board members looked visibly uncomfortable. A few tried to ask whether my land was actually covered under HOA governance, but Karen dismissed them flat. "We have a moral responsibility," she said. "If the city won't act, we will." I was still trying to wrap my head around that when Jenna found a notice duct taped to our mailbox a few days later. It wasn't postmarked, meaning someone delivered it by hand, and it read, "Final notification. Unauthorized structure will be removed. HOA action date, TBD." I called my attorney again. This time, we didn't just send a letter. We filed an official notice with the county sheriff's department. Any attempt by Pine Creek Hollow or its contractors to enter my property without consent would be treated as criminal trespass. I forwarded copies to the HOA's registered office. I even hung warning signs on the fence. For a few days, things went quiet. No more surveyors, no more notices, but I'd worked construction long enough to recognize the quiet before a storm. It started with a rumble, the kind of low, mechanical sound that makes your gut tighten before your brain even understands why. I was tightening bolts on my workshop bench that afternoon when I heard it, faint but steady, from the back alley. When I stepped outside, squinting into the sun, I spotted them. 2 trucks, one white, one slate gray, both marked with magnetic signs that read, "Pine Creek Grounds and Maintenance." I knew right away they weren't city. Too clean, too careful. HOA subcontractors, no doubt. They weren't on my land yet. But they had parked just beyond my property line and were unloading gear like they owned the place. Ladders, saws, safety vests, the whole overcompensating setup. I stayed on the porch and waited until one of them noticed me. "Afternoon," the older guy said, glancing up. "We're just surveying the structure for removal. Standard protocol." I crossed my arms. "You're surveying my kid's treehouse like it's asbestos." "That's standard protocol." The younger guy shifted awkwardly and muttered something about following orders. I didn't move. "You see that fence?" I said. "That's a property line. Cross it, and I call the cops." Again. They packed up not long after that, but not before the younger one, a wiry guy with a tattoo of a phoenix on his forearm, tossed something into my mailbox. Jenna found it later that night. A folded scrap of paper, handwritten in sharp black ink. She said to take it down no matter what. "You might want to make sure no one's inside when we do." No signature, just that. Like a warning or a threat. I couldn't tell which. Jenna looked at me, eyes wide. "This is insane." "It's criminal," I replied, already snapping a photo of the note for our lawyer. That weekend, I doubled down, added motion sensor lights along the fence line, recalibrated the cameras to catch every inch of the backyard, installed a new sign on the gate that read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted," in all caps, with a friendly little smiley face underneath just for irony. My kids, meanwhile, stayed oblivious. They were up in the treehouse every evening, eating snacks, drawing comics, whispering spy missions to each other. Theo, the youngest, had rigged a makeshift pulley system to deliver gummy worms from the ground up to the top hatch. It was adorable and heartbreaking. I didn't want them to know what was going on. Not yet. Then, on Tuesday, Jenna got a message from one of the other moms in the neighborhood. Lauren, the same friend who'd told us about the HOA meeting. She'd overheard something in line at the bakery. Apparently, at the last board meeting, Karen had issued what she called an internal directive to remove the offending structure within 2 weeks, claiming informal authorization from the Community Safety Committee. Whatever the hell that meant. Worse, she'd mentioned bringing in a security escort for the operation, citing potential resistance. I forwarded everything to our attorney that same night. He told me to keep documenting everything, keep it civil, keep it legal. But his voice had a different tone now, sharper, more concerned. The next morning, I spoke with Officer Ramirez at the County Sheriff's Department. I gave her the paper from the mailbox and explained what we'd been hearing. She nodded slowly and said she'd flag our address for priority response if a disturbance occurred. We've had issues with that HOA before, she added under her breath. That gave me exactly zero comfort. Something was brewing. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I'd feel tension in a bridge design before the math could prove it. Karen wasn't done bluffing. She was preparing to act. And this time, she wasn't bringing just a clipboard. Thursday started like any other. The kind of day you take for granted. Mild breeze, sun high but not punishing, kids off school for a district-wide teacher training day. Jenna was at her sister's helping with baby shower prep. I had planned to join her later, but first, I needed to pick up a batch of custom brackets for a client's project. I remember thinking, as I backed out of the driveway, how peaceful the house looked. Theo, Ben, and their cousin Max, who was staying with us for a few days, were already in the treehouse, giggling loud enough to echo through the backyard. They had brought snacks, comic books, and their newest obsession, walkie-talkies that never actually worked. I waved to them through the side mirror and drove off, expecting to be back in a couple of hours. I made it 20 minutes out of town when my phone rang. It was the neighbor, Ms. Henderson, 80-something, sharp as a tack, with binoculars always within arm's reach. She didn't waste time. "Alex, there's a truck in your backyard, big one, with some men and a woman in a pantsuit. Your boys are screaming in that treehouse. I already called 911. My stomach dropped through the floorboard. I pulled a U-turn across 2 lanes of traffic and floored it. I barely remember the drive back, just the sound of my heart punching in my chest and the worst-case scenarios hammering through my skull. By the time I reached my street, I could already see the police cruiser's lights flashing near the entrance to my drive, and beyond it, chaos. The white truck I'd seen earlier that week had plowed halfway across my lawn. 2 workers stood frozen beside a stack of power tools. One of them, the younger guy with the phoenix tattoo, had a saw in his hand, halfway into a support beam. The goddamn treehouse was tilting, and Karen Sloan, dressed like she was headed to a power brunch with Satan, was standing near the edge of the patio, yelling at the officer. I jumped out of my truck and sprinted toward the backyard, ignoring everyone, vaulting over the low stone fence. "Ms." Henderson stood nearby, arms out like she'd just stopped traffic, shouting, "There are children inside!" Theo's voice cracked through the air, pure panic. "Dad!" It moved. I looked up. All 3 boys were crouched near the window, wide-eyed, gripping the wooden railings. One of the support beams was clearly splintered, the base hacked partway through. The damn idiots had started cutting without even checking if anyone was inside. I grabbed the ladder and shouted for the kids to stay still. "I've got you. Don't move." I climbed up, heart slamming, and one by one pulled them down. Theo was limping. He'd banged his knee against a corner during the sudden jolt. Max was sobbing. Ben tried to act brave, but his hands shook so hard he could barely hold on to me. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Jenna pulled up just behind them, panic etched into her face. The second she saw Theo being loaded onto a stretcher, she collapsed into tears. While the EMTs treated the boys, I turned to face the wreckage. The leaning structure, the torn-up lawn, the still whirring saw dropped in the grass, and Karen, standing there like she was inconvenienced by the noise. She had the audacity to say, "This wouldn't have happened if you'd complied." The police didn't need another word. One officer went straight for the workers, ordering them to step away from the tools. Another was already cuffing the so-called HOA officer, a middle-aged guy with a laminated badge clipped to his belt like it gave him divine authority. And then Karen. "You are under arrest," the cop told her, "for trespassing, destruction of property, and endangering minors." She didn't resist. She just stared at me as they put her in cuffs, cold, smug, like she still thought she'd win, but I was already done with the staring. I I turned back to the treehouse, still leaning but standing, like a wounded soldier refusing to fall. The moment they cuffed Karen, a silence fell over the yard. Not peaceful, but heavy, like the weight of a bad storm just passed. One officer read her rights out loud, clear and slow, while the others moved to secure the perimeter. The younger cop radioed for backup and an evidence team. It felt surreal, standing there with my son's blood still on my shirt, while the president of an HOA was being loaded into a cruiser like some two-bit felon. Theo was in the ambulance by then, legs stabilized, eyes glassy but responsive. Jenna rode with him. She didn't say a word as they pulled away, just gave me this look, pure rage, barely held together with grief. I'd seen her angry before, but this was different. This was a mother who'd nearly lost a child because some psychopath couldn't tolerate wood in a tree. One of the officers, Ramirez, approached me. I recognized her from our earlier conversation, and the expression on her face said everything. "We're treating this as a felony trespass, Alex," she said, "and potentially reckless endangerment. Possibly child endangerment, depending on what the DA sees on those security feeds you mentioned." I pointed to the cameras, 3 of them, mounted along the eaves of the house, and 1 in the yard, motion activated and cloud synced. Ramirez nodded and asked for access. I handed over my phone and scrolled to the app. What we saw was worse than I remembered. The footage showed the crew arriving without any formal law enforcement present, just Karen, clipboard in hand, barking instructions like she was running a demolition derby. The so-called HOA officer never once asked if the treehouse was occupied. He stood back, arms crossed, while the workers fired up the saws. Then there was Karen herself walking right up to the lead contractor and saying, clear as day, "Start from the base. Don't waste time checking. He'll lie anyway." Ramirez's jaw clenched. She rewound it and played it again. "This is more than trespass," she muttered. "This is deliberate." While the tech unit pulled the footage for evidence, another officer brought me a clipboard. "Mind giving us a statement?" he asked. I took it and started writing. Everything I could remember, from the first notice to the paper in the mailbox to this morning's horror. It took 2 full pages. Meanwhile, the 2 workers, the ones who'd actually started sawing, were being questioned beside the truck. I overheard parts of it. "We just did what we were told. She said she had authority. We didn't know kids were inside." Ramirez didn't look convinced. After a quick huddle with the responding sergeant, they detained both workers for further questioning. One was led away in cuffs. The other sat in the back of a cruiser, head in his hands. The whole block had started to gather now, neighbors poking their heads out, a few walking up to the edge of my driveway. Lauren came over horrified. "Alex, I had no idea she'd go this far." "Neither did I said. "But we're past apologies now." A crime scene tape was being stretched across the backyard fence. The treehouse stood there, wounded but upright, with the lower support beam half sawn and splintered. Ms. Henderson was giving her own statement to another officer, gesturing animatedly and pointing directly at Karen's SUV. I hoped they got it all on record. Every word. The arresting officer finally approached me again, holding Karen's clipboard. "You'll want to keep this," he said. "Looks like she wrote her own version of events. Might be useful." I flipped it open. Sure enough, inside was a demolition schedule, signed with a printed copy of the HOA's logo, and a fake permit. It was a joke, a piece of clip art, and a scribbled signature from Director of Community Enforcement, which, as far as I could tell, was Karen's made-up title. I handed it to Ramirez. She gave me a tight smile. "We're just getting started. I didn't expect to become a headline. I didn't build a damn treehouse to start a war, much less make national news. But within 24 hours, our story wasn't just in the neighborhood, it was everywhere." It started with a TikTok. Ms. Henderson's granddaughter, apparently a tech-savvy college kid, had stitched together clips from our security footage with her own commentary. Grainy, shaky footage of the saw biting into the beam, the kids screaming from inside, Karen barking. Orders in her HOA battle armor. She overlaid it with the words, "HOA nearly demolishes treehouse, with children inside, because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." The video blew up overnight. By morning, it had 2 million views. By lunch, there were news vans outside my house. Local reporters knocked first, then regional affiliates, then CNN. Someone said there was a crew from Good Morning America circling the block. My phone was exploding. Voicemails, emails, DMs from people I hadn't spoken to in years. And it wasn't just noise. It was fury. Gashas Treehouse Gate was trending on Twitter. Justice for Theo was on Instagram. People were posting pictures of their own childhood forts and treehouses, writing things like, "This is what HOA tyranny looks like," and "When Karen goes too far, kids pay the price." I even saw a meme of Karen photoshopped onto the Death Star, blasting treehouses from orbit. Jenna and I tried to keep the kids shielded from it, but it was impossible. Ben saw one of the clips on his friend's phone before we could catch it. He didn't say anything, just sat next to Theo's hospital bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Max wouldn't stop asking why that lady wanted to knock down our fort. What do you tell a 9-year-old? That some adults care more about fake rules than real people. Meanwhile, HOA board members were scrambling. Lauren called that night, whispering like she was part of a spy thriller. She's not returning calls. Half the board wants to dissolve. There's talk of hiring a crisis PR firm. Too late, I said. The next day, HOA released a statement through their website, a 5-paragraph disaster of corporate doublespeak. They called it a miscommunication, said they regretted the unfortunate timing of the demolition, and expressed relief that no children were seriously harmed. It was about as sincere as a used car ad. People lit them up. Local activists started demanding HOA reform. A petition to remove the entire board reached 50,000 signatures in 2 days. Protesters even showed up at the HOA office with cardboard signs. "Don't touch our tree houses. Children are not code violations. Hey Karen, this isn't North Korea." Reporters uncovered other shady stories tied to Pine Creek Hollow. One woman claimed she'd been fined for planting sunflowers too aggressively. Another said Karen once ordered a fence removed because it was emotionally disruptive to passers-by. No one had cared before. Now the floodgates were open. I couldn't walk into the grocery store without someone shaking my hand. A guy at the hardware store paid for my plywood without asking. A local bakery dropped off a "We Stand with Treehouse Dad" cake, chocolate fudge with little candy tools. Theo came home 3 days later, limping but healing. The doctors said he'd be fine physically, emotionally. That was going to take time. He asked me if we'd rebuild the treehouse. I didn't hesitate. Stronger than ever. And I meant it. Because now this wasn't just about some neighborhood dispute. This was about every family that got steamrolled by people like Karen who thought power meant permission. And I wasn't going to let them write the ending. The morning after Theo came home, I met with my lawyer in person. Gina Bentley was not the type to sugarcoat anything. Former federal prosecutor turned civil rights battering ram. She walked into my kitchen with a laptop under one arm and a legal pad full of bullets under the other. Her first words, "We're not just going to defend. We're going to burn their whole playbook." She laid out the plan like a military campaign. First, we filed a civil suit against Karen Sloan and Pine Creek Hollow HOA. Charges included criminal trespass, destruction of property, endangerment of minors, negligence, unauthorized demolition, and emotional distress. The number Gina scribbled at the bottom of the draft complaint? $750,000 in damages. Not a bluff. Every cent was backed up with hospital bills, contractor estimates, surveillance footage, and statements from eyewitnesses, including Ms. Henderson and the workers themselves. Then came the separate filing, a criminal referral handed directly to the district attorney's office. The security footage had already been logged by police, but Gina packaged it neatly. Timestamps, written transcripts, still images, and that damning audio clip of Karen telling her crew not to check if anyone was inside. The footage of Theo's face at the window, sheer terror, was enough to make the DA's assistant flinch. "I've prosecuted drug gangs with more common sense," Gina muttered. But the twist that lit the match? The discovery of the fake permit. The one we found on Karen's clipboard. Our private investigator dug a little deeper. Turned out the signature at the bottom belonged to no one. Literally, the Director of Community Enforcement wasn't a registered position. Karen had forged the title, copied the HOA logo from a PDF online, and distributed the document internally like gospel. That pushed everything into a new category: document fraud and impersonation of a public officer. Gina submitted that too, with a request for expedited review. Meanwhile, news outlets were begging for exclusives. I gave a brief interview to a local paper, mostly to correct some details. No, the kids weren't trapped for hours. And yes, the treehouse had been legally permitted and structurally reinforced. But the bigger news was already swirling. Other families came forward. One neighbor, an older vet named Tom, shared how Karen had threatened to fine him into bankruptcy for parking his RV 2 feet outside an imaginary zone of decorum. Another claimed she'd received citations for wind chimes being too audible after 7 p.m. People were done being silent. The HOA board started fracturing. 3 members resigned within 72 hours. A fourth reached out to Gina anonymously, offering internal emails, including a thread where Karen mocked my attorney as just some backyard hammer swinger. Big mistake. We added defamation to the suit and conspiracy to commit trespass once it became clear other board members had approved the demolition schedule despite knowing my property wasn't under HOA control. By the end of the week, Gina filed a motion to freeze HOA discretionary funds, preventing them from using residents' dues to fund their legal defense. That made Karen public enemy #1 in her own neighborhood. Flyers started appearing around Pine Creek Hollow. Where are your dues really going? Want to pay for Karen's lawsuit? Neither do we. One HOA member, site previously silent, published a statement calling for the complete suspension of Karen's authority and the appointment of an external auditor. At this point, even the HOA's insurance provider got nervous. I heard from Gina that their liability coverage carrier sent a formal letter to the board threatening to pull coverage entirely if Karen remained president. And still, Karen hadn't made a public comment. Her silence wasn't strategic. It was pure delusion. She still believed she could win. I was starting to believe she'd been drunk on power for so long, she forgot what consequences tasted like, but she was about to get reacquainted. The courthouse was packed. I didn't expect that. I thought we'd get the usual handful of curious locals and maybe a bored reporter or two. Instead, the gallery looked like a sold-out show. Journalists, neighbors, even strangers who'd driven in from other towns. Some held notepads. Some wore t-shirts that said things like, "I love treehouses," and "Not today, Karen." It would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. Karen sat at the defense table like a dethroned monarch. Arms crossed, lips pursed, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my truck. She didn't look at me once. The HOA attorney, some smug corporate guy with an expensive haircut and the charm of a tax audit, kept whispering to her like she was the victim. Spoiler alert, that didn't work. Our side opened with the footage, straight into the hard stuff. No dramatic buildup, no soft landing, just the video of the demolition team cutting into the support beam while my kids screamed above, the treehouse wobbling like a dying animal. Then Karen's voice, crisp and clear. "Start from the base. Don't waste time checking. He'll lie anyway." You could hear a pin drop in the room after that. The prosecution followed up with witness after witness. Ms. Henderson testified first, fierce as ever, recounting the exact moment she realized the kids were in danger and how she screamed for the workers to stop. One of the paramedics described Theo's injuries and his fear. And then came Lauren, the former HOA board member who brought the house down. She handed over internal emails between Karen and the board. One included a message from Karen saying, "If we give him an inch, we'll be up to our necks in treehouses, chicken coops, and God knows what else. He's not in the HOA now. But let's fix that before he infects the block." Yeah, she actually wrote that. Karen's attorney objected, argued that the messages were taken out of context. The judge overruled. Twice. When it came time for the defense, they fumbled hard. Their argument? That Karen acted out of a community protection imperative, that she believed the structure posed a danger and had no choice but to act quickly for the greater good. No mention of jurisdiction, no acknowledgement of the fake permit, no apology. Karen herself took the stand. Bad idea. She tried to spin it, said the kids were reckless, that I had antagonized the HOA, that my wife had once given her a passive-aggressive glare at a community market. You could feel the room turn against her with every word. Even the judge looked like he wanted to toss her off the bench. Then Gina stood up for cross-examination. She started soft, asked Karen to confirm her role, her responsibilities, the scope of her authority. Karen puffed up like a balloon. Then came the scalpel. "So, Ms. Sloan," Gina said, pacing slowly, "were you aware that the property you authorized a demolition on was not legally within HOA jurisdiction?" Karen hesitated. I believed it was included based on previous maps." Gina raised an eyebrow. "Belief is not law. Did you confirm with city records?" "I didn't need to. The community expectations—" "Let's talk about expectations." Gina interrupted, then held up a printout of the forged permit. "You submitted this document to the demolition team. Can you tell the court who signed it?" Karen swallowed. It was a standard form. With a title that doesn't exist and a logo pulled from Google Images, Gina stepped closer. Ms. Sloan, is it true that you impersonated an official authority to carry out an illegal demolition that endangered 3 children? Karen froze. That was it. That was the moment the case cracked wide open. The judge ordered a recess shortly after. The courtroom buzzed like a shaken beehive. Reporters were already rushing to file their updates. Outside, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps. Chants broke out, nothing aggressive, but loud enough for Karen to hear as she was escorted out a side door. The trial wasn't over, but it didn't need a fortune teller to see where it was headed. The facts were in. The lies were exposed. And for the first time since this all started, I let myself believe justice was actually on the way. The final day of the trial felt less like a courtroom session and more like the closing act of a very public reckoning. I sat in the front row with Jenna, our fingers locked so tightly together, my knuckles turned white. Gina stood calm and composed beside me, reviewing her closing notes with the same precision I'd use inspecting a steel frame. Across the aisle, Karen sat stiffer than ever, her lawyer whispering something she clearly wasn't listening to. She looked tired, like a dictator at the end of her rule. Still dressed for a press conference, but the crowd had long since turned against her. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The clerk read through the jury's findings slowly, one charge at a time. My pulse pounded in my ears. Count 1, criminal trespass, guilty. Count 2, reckless endangerment of minors, guilty. Count 3, destruction of private property, guilty. Count 4, fraudulent use of documents, guilty. Count 5, conspiracy to commit unlawful demolition, guilty. The list went on. Each guilty was like a steel beam locking into place in a structure that was finally holding firm. Karen didn't blink, didn't move. I don't even think she understood what was happening. Maybe some part of her truly believed she was immune, that being the head of a suburban HOA came with diplomatic immunity or divine right, but reality had teeth. The judge didn't mince words. He acknowledged the national attention the case had drawn, but made it clear that regardless of publicity, the facts were overwhelming. Karen Sloan had acted with deliberate disregard for jurisdiction, legal boundaries, and, most disturbingly, the safety of children. Then came the sentencing. 6 years in state prison with no option for parole until at least 4 had been served. Permanent removal from any civil or administrative office, including homeowners associations. And then the big one. Financial restitution. Karen was ordered to pay $780,000 in compensatory and punitive damages directly to me and my family. This included hospital bills, property repair, emotional distress, lost wages, and the legal equivalent of for being a reckless, entitled disaster of a human being. Okay, the judge didn't say that last part, but it was heavily implied. But it didn't stop with her. The HOA itself was found civilly liable. A separate judgment required Pine Creek Hollow to pay an additional $300,000 in damages. Their insurance provider pulled out that same afternoon, citing irreparable misconduct. Several board members faced individual lawsuits and were forced to resign under public pressure and legal scrutiny. The HOA was placed under court-appointed external supervision for the next 2 years, a rare but entirely satisfying move. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of cameras and microphones waited. I wasn't interested. I gave one short statement. We didn't build that treehouse to start a fight. We built it because our kids deserved joy. What happened was wrong, and now it's been made right. Then we left. As we pulled away, Jenna glanced at me, and I could tell she wanted to ask what came next, but she didn't have to. I already knew we were going to rebuild, not just the treehouse, the calm, the trust, the sense that our home was our own, not subject to the whims of some self-appointed tyrant with a name tag and a god complex. Justice had landed like a steel beam dropped from the sky, and I was finally free to breathe again. We rebuilt the treehouse with thicker beams, not because it needed them. The original had been over-engineered by design, but because I wanted it to stand as a monument, not just to my kids' imagination, but to our survival. It took 2 weeks, a dozen late nights, and enough bolts to hold a small bridge. Jenna joked that I was building a panic bunker with a slide. Maybe I was. The kids helped, of course. Theo still walked with a slight limp, but he never once let it slow him down. He hammered nails like a pro, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in pure concentration. Ben rewired the solar lights we'd salvaged from the old structure. And Max, well, Max mostly supervised with a juice box and firm opinions on what color the railing should be. We painted it forest green with orange trim, Theo's idea. The morning after we finished, the four of us sat up there with hot cocoa, watching the sun rise over the rooftops of Pine Creek Hollow. The sky was pink and gold, quiet except for birdsong. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not the absence of trouble, but the presence of safety. Jenna joined us a few minutes later, coffee in hand. She had a look on her face, that familiar fire, and held out a metal sign she'd had custom made. It read, "Kids welcome. Trespassers will regret it." In smaller text below, "Treehouse protected by Dad's wrath, Mom's fury, and 3 very observant neighbors." We all laughed, hard and long. Then I bolted it to the fence. Within a month, the neighborhood had changed. Karen's name became a cautionary tale, not a threat. Her house was listed for sale, pending litigation noted in the fine print. The HOA board was replaced by a new interim committee that actually knocked on doors before trying to govern lives. Some neighbors even dropped off baked goods and thank you notes. Others just nodded with quiet relief when they passed. People stopped whispering. They started talking again. Jenna launched a local reform group focused on homeowner rights and HOA oversight. She spoke at City Hall, wrote an op-ed, got invited to a town council committee. Apparently, justice was addictive. As for me, I went back to my job, my family, my woodshop. I got a few new clients, mostly folks who'd seen my interview and decided they wanted a guy who stood his ground designing their homes. I didn't complain. One night, a week before school started again, we held a backyard party, lights strung across trees, burgers on the grill, kids running barefoot in the grass. The rebuilt treehouse was the centerpiece. Everyone came, even the neighbors who'd once backed Karen. No speeches, no tension, just joy. Near the end of the night, Theo sat next to me on the steps of the deck and looked up at the treehouse glowing gently under the lights. "Dad," he said, "I think it's better now, stronger." I smiled. "Yeah, buddy, I think we are too." He nodded and leaned his head on my shoulder. I watched the shadows dance under the branches, the house I built holding steady in the night. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't worry about who was watching from beyond the fence, because they knew better now. Everyone did.